For nearly 5 years, I was assigned as a ranger on Alex Carter Kodiak Island. Before that, I lived on the mainland in Seattle. I live a quiet life every day, free from nightmares and ghost stories, whispers from bartenders and fishermen. Everything changed when I met Thomas Whitaker, former lighthouse keeper at the Kodiak Lighthouse. The old weather journal I found hidden in a drawer in the station office was the first source of information about Whitaker. It was filled with pages of stiff, clean handwriting describing the lighthouse's history, lighthouse operation, and the chaotic events that Thomas encountered while working there. As the last few pages flip back and forth, Thomas describes in his writings the oppressive and incessant burden of the gaze, heard noises in the air, saw strange figures on the rocks beneath the lighthouse. A few days before, he mysteriously disappeared. The final passage states this: "Now more than ever I feel the island itself is still alive. Lighthouses serve more than just direct navigation. It's holding something. When you stay too long, you will lose something. And I feel like it's a loss. I'm afraid I won't make it through this. It is important for anyone who discovers this magazine to understand that this island is cursed. The rocks, the trees, the wind, they all take up attention. I heard the call of something darker than I first thought. The wind. If I disappear, it's not a choice." I remember the first time I read those words. They give me chills, but I brushed it off. My world is not a place for the supernatural. I consider myself a practical guy. It's based on reality. It is not paranoid, delusional people who believe in ghosts. Rachel and I didn't cross paths until a few months later. Once I was on my regular patrol around the lighthouse. Her goal as a freelance journalist is to write about the rich history and folklore of Kodiak Island. Like me, Rachel is an outsider, and she has come to find the truth hidden behind the veil of superstition. As with most stories about this island, we met by chance. Rachel watches as Whitaker disappears along with other strange events involving the lighthouse. She's interested in me too, but when I agreed to help her, I really don't know. So what am I doing? Rachel is a charming woman, curious about the unknown but wary of danger. She had an air that could tell when something was wrong, and she doesn't hesitate to search for answers. But she had a fascination that I had never noticed before. We began our first day exploring the area around the lighthouse. Then more often at night, when the shadows seemed to lengthen and the wind whispered in every way I could. It is described Rachel's obsession with Whitaker's magazine intensifies. She read his words aloud, almost respectfully, as if hoping they would reveal more. She becomes more and more attached to the island each night, and the differences between the imagined and the real begin to blur. And it's not just her behavior. The island itself felt different. The night wind howls and the lighthouse's light blinked as if in response to an invisible force. Only Rachel seemed able to respond to the soft whispers carried by the wind. She stood on the side of a cliff and stared out over the rocks. Her eyes were mesmerizing, as if she had just heard something. At first I thought she was just tired. But as time passed, I began to notice a change in her. Her eyes sank and her complexion became pale, as if she had not slept for many days. I couldn't help but wonder if she was serving what Whitaker had inherited. One night, Rachel insisted we go to the lighthouse. The weather is cooler than it should be. Dense fog surrounds us. It's already late. As we approached the lighthouse, I saw something I had never seen before. Something about the rocks below, which Thomas wrote about in his journal. It looked strange, crawling around uncleanly as if they were still alive. I shivered as soon as I entered the lighthouse. It was as if the structure was breathing, alive, waiting. Rachel lost her gaze to something in the distance. After she stared, I saw it, a figure at the base of the lighthouse. Its shape was too vague to be clearly recognized. Darkness seemed to be what it was used to create. "Rachel, you have to go," I said, my voice shaking. "You don't hear me." She was already walking towards that figure, draw like a moth towards a flame. After that, I don't remember much. Next thing I know, I stood outside the lighthouse and looked out over the rocks. Rachel wasn't there. There was no sign of her at all. There were no footprints or traces. The air became heavy, as if the island was holding its breath and expecting something. Now I know that Rachel claims whatever island she curses, she was too focused, too burned by magazines whisper into the air. The intense attention caused her to collapse. I never understand you, but the whispers are still there. After that, I left Kodiak Island. The weight of what happened there never really left me. It wasn't clear to me that Rachel was still there. She's lost in the dark, Move those rocks. Or is there something else holding her back? What I do know is that there is a lot on Kodiak Island that we never understand. In my opinion, the island is thriving with interest. If you search too hard or look too close, it will find you. And it never lets you go, even after returning to the mainland. Sometimes I can still hear Kodiak Island humming late at night. I wonder if the wind will howl in the dark and call to me. Second story. Shouldn't be sitting in this damp, rotting hut tonight off Kodiak Island. I never wanted to tell this story. Now I have to, for my sanity, lost soul secrets hidden in the shadows of this island. You might think I'm crazy for telling you this. Anyway, it interests me. You have to listen to everything. My name is Jason Carter, and I am the landowner of a nearby research facility. I have lived on Kodiak Island for the past 7 years. You'd think I'd get used to being alone. I'm never used to being quiet. Wind here blows evenly, blowing through the trees, touching your skin like a cold hand that never lets go. Crashing waves on the rocks, the distant cries of crows were my only friends. It's enough to forget that other people exist, not to mention horrors that still haunt this place. That was until I remembered David Lamson. David wasn't like everyone else that I ever encountered here. He and his wife, Ellen, visited Kodiak Island several years ago. Find solace after tragedy that tore their family apart. Or as they say, Ellen had a quiet expression, and David had an aura of sorrow that seemed to hang over his eyes like a cloud. But it was their daughter Jenny that really caught my attention. She died many years ago. There were whispers all over the island. Some say it was an accident. Something else is more frightening. I never had to ask. I kept myself aloof like everyone else. Then one day, David approached me. He looked like a pale man, with a pale face and trembling hands. He didn't look like the man who greeted me in the store with a polite smile. His voice was barely a whisper as he approached me. "You need help," he said, eyes wide and hopeless. "There is something in the boathouse. Anything that isn't there." I had never thought much about boathouses before. As far as I can remember, it was old, dilapidated, and abandoned. Most people avoid it. Of course, there are rumors, ghosts of old island residents, something about the place being cursed. I don't think such a thing exists, or at least I won't until I see what's inside. I agreed to meet him there. As soon as I stepped outside that night, I felt the air go out. It cut through my cooler clothes with a strong gust of wind. Thick clouds covered the full moon, covering the island in an unsettling darkness. David stood in the doorway to the boathouse. His hand rested on the rusty doorknob, as if his only connection to the outside world. "Come in," he urged, his voice shaking. I felt a knot in my stomach. I followed him. As soon as I entered the boat shed, it hit me, the pressure in the air. It was as if something was watching us and breathing with us. As we walked out into the dimly lit night from the lamp of David, the ancient logs creaked under our feet. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was just the eyes playing tricks on me. Something in the shadows, unhealthy figure. When I stare, my heart began to race. It's not human. It's not something I can understand. It looked like a crooked, curved shadow from a distance. My breath is stuck in my throat. When David spoke, he could hardly be heard. "What do you see?" he asked. I nodded but couldn't speak. My throat was dry. Something about the figure wasn't right. It seemed like it was pulling me into the limit, pulling me in, then disappearing in an instant. Before I could respond, there was the sound of a car crash coming from the back of the room. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. Lantern swings in my hand, casting unexpected shadows on the wall. Its eyes has disappeared. I can feel it, pressing down on me. David froze, his eyes wide with fear. "I know," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "I know this place isn't empty." Walls surrounding us made the air thicker. I turned to David. Something in his eyes made me hesitate. He is not afraid of what we see. No, something is broken within him. "You have to go," I said, sounding more urgent than intended. David doesn't respond. He stared at something I couldn't see. His hands shook as he supported himself. His mouth open, no sound came out. When I reached out to him, I understood. David wasn't just afraid of the boathouse. What he did scared him. Something dark. Something had been waiting in that room for too long. Even when we ran, the wind outside continued to blow strong. Darkness seemed to creep into our lungs and curl around our feet when we finally reached the hut. David collapsed in the doorway, gasping for air, his body filled with fear. "Boathouse," he whispered. His words became incoherent. "It's not just a place, it's a pipe. The pipe was damaged in the fire. Everything must be finished, but it never stops." Next morning I went alone. I had to do it. I had an unshakable feeling that something had been overlooked. The boathouse is quiet during the day. My stomach twisted as I reached the door. Fresh blood stains, still wet, could be seen on the floor. Spread to the back of the room, I don't need to ask what happened. I know it is David's past is intertwined with that place. It's the crime that haunts the shipyard, not the ghost. I know what you do. However, when the night wind blows, I wonder if I can really trust my own memories. Is there anything I can leave behind? Was there anyone else in that house that day? Or is it just an island that feeds the doubts that bother me? My name is Jason Westcott, and this is my story. A story of loss, betrayal, and trust broken beyond repair. This island already knows my name, and it was a name that reverberated far and wide after I left. Third story. It's a cool evening on Kodiak Island, the wind blowing a bitter howl that almost sounds alive. I've spent my whole life on this island. No matter how many years passed, I felt like it was always watching and listening to me. Something I couldn't identify thickened in the air. It presses against my chest every time I try to breathe normally. My name is Jason Westcott, local contractor. People like to think that we live an easy life here. Those who think don't know what I see. In a place like this, they don't know what it's like to hear their own heartbeat in the stillness. When I made the decision to hire Lindsay Parton, I was a single father. I need someone I can trust, who can take care of my daughter, Hannah. Demands of working at the port discouraged me in the spring of 2018. A friend recommended Lindsay. She looks like the kind of woman who can blend into the background. She is small and quiet, which is a safe choice, or as I believe. This woman looks kind, but I didn't know that you would make my life a nightmare. Lindsay isn't like any other woman I know. She's fragile. I can feel it in your eyes, the way they stare at you for too long. It was as if she was always looking for something she couldn't find. She has a troubled past, which includes a failed marriage, untreated miscarriage, and 2 children she could barely care for. And that's where it breaks me. There was tension about the little body of her, which I don't always understand. As a bookkeeper for my father's business, she earns a living every day. Her night was full of annoyances. It was something she never talked about. After a while, I realized how deep her pain was. It was Hannah who kept her. Otherwise, I don't think so. The truth is, Jason, reality is darker than any of us could have imagined. March 8th, 2018. It seemed like any other day at first. As usual, I dropped Hannah off at Lindsay's at 7 a.m., the morning chill still clinging to the floor. Hannah floated home, her little hand holding her favorite stuffed animal. Her face was as bright with energy as ever. Later that day, I came back from a long day at the construction site and noticed the change in the atmosphere. My skin tingled from the silence within. The door opened slightly. I found Hannah lying on the floor in the living room, her little body bruised, as if she had been badly hit by the fall. I stopped. It wasn't just bruises on her arms and legs. Her throat was blackened. She had been strangled. Jason couldn't breathe. Lindsay's eyes were too wide, and her voice cracked as she explained the unexplainable. She said she fell. She tried to tell me it was just a fall. Bruises were from clumsiness, but I knew what I saw was more than just an accident. And I know the next few hours were a blur. The police have arrived. The truth begins to crawl out of the shadows until they put more pressure on Lindsay. I'm afraid to accept you. Her words didn't make sense at first. Then it makes sense. He shakes Hannah and tries to stop her moaning somehow. He hits her. He hits her. She even admits to hitting her with a capital letter. A capital letter. How could a girl like Lindsay know how to hit a child like that? Her acceptance was slow at first, but it spread in waves. Even though what she did could not be classified as discipline. But she talked about the discipline she tried to enforce. It was intense, pure, and simple. For the first time, I saw her for who she was. Lindsay didn't go down easily. During the trial, she forced her to confess, did not confess. Her lawyers did everything they could to discredit me. Even though I said the night before, there was another man in the house who attacked me. She tried hard to hide the truth of what had happened, and it was all just a web of lies. However, the police cornered her, and the medical evidence leaves no doubt. The whole court knew that Lindsay Parton is a murderer. Considering what was taken from me, she received a life sentence, which is a little fair. That slight relief was short-lived. My daughter is gone. Nothing can stop that. Now I'm sitting here on the cliffs of Kodiak Island, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. The howling wind in the night seemed to stop the noise in my heart. The way this island seemed to preserve everything, including people, stories, and mistakes. All with an unflinching quality, Lindsay Parton's name is now becoming part of the island's dark folklore. Like tales of abandoned lighthouses and ghost ships lost in the mist. Her twisted behavior would be spread by locals for years to come. But there's more to it than that. It's something I can't shake. Lindsay doesn't give up. She is still fighting for her freedom. She claims to have photos. New evidence to prove her innocence. Photo of Hannah, wounded long before serious injury. She thought this picture would get her out of jail. But I know better, I know what I have seen.